Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Friends and Fiction Show Behind the Book with four New York Times bestselling authors and endless stories. I am Patti Callahan Henry, and on behalf of Mary Kay Andrews, Kristen Harmel, and Kristy Woodson Harvey, we are excited to welcome you to a special episode of Friends and Fiction Behind the Book, where we take a quicker, deeper dive into the life and work of some of our very favorite authors. And today, I know she is a fan favorite on the page, and with so many of you, we are thrilled to welcome Kristy Cambron to talk about her latest, The British Booksellers. It is based on real accounts of Britain's land girls. And I have to tell you, Kristy, I dove into the land girls. I was
Oh,
like,
yay.
land girls, what are those? And the
Yeah.
Forgotten Blitz, including the November 1940 bombing of Coventry, that was Britain's largest single civilian loss of life in World War II. The British Booksellers highlights the courageous choices we must make to live, to love, and in the face of all that tests us. Now, Kristy Cambron, I know you know her, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, is a vintage inspired, and I love that, vintage inspired storyteller writing from the space where beauty, art, and history. Winnie's joining us. Can you hear her?
Yes,
Hello,
she's
Winnie.
lovely. Hello.
And intersect. She is a Christie Award-winning author of historical fiction as well as nonfiction titles. She also serves as vice president and literary agent with the Gardner Literary. Her work has been named to Cosmo's Best Historical Fictions, Publishers Weekly, Religion and Spirituality, on and on. I love that she holds a degree in art history and research writing and spent 15 years in education before she started writing. Kristy lives in Indiana with her husband and three basketball loving sons, where she can probably be bribed with a peppermint mocha latte. And so can I. So we will just bribe each other. So our very own Kristy Woodson Harvey has said that this book is a testament to bravery, loss, and the power story has to unite us. 5 huge stars. So I'm going to stop talking because I am dying for you to tell us more. I've just described what the book is about, but tell us a little bit more and what you think the book is really about, Kristy.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this because typically when I start writing a book, and Patty, you may be like this too, it's typically for me with historical fiction, a
Yes.
fact in history, something that happened plus a question equals you get this whole story. And so the British Booksellers for me is really this. You've got Mail versus Downton Abbey. So it's got both of that in it. It's got rival booksellers. And these are our main characters, Amos and Charlotte, rival booksellers who are warring at war. They used to be loves back in the Great War. The Great War tore them apart. And then World War II comes and they're rivals across the street from one another. So what happens when World War II comes to their doorstep? Can they set their differences aside and can they really work to survive? And do they get their second chance romance? And so for me, that historical fact was the Forgotten Blitz. And I really didn't know a lot about it, but then reading about all of these areas outside of London, especially in Coventry, which is where the book is set. It's about 100 miles outside of London, factory city, but it has this medieval heart. It has the medieval cathedral back in the 1940s. And it's got a big community who really is proud of their city. And so then we've got the Blitz areas that are bombing all over, and they're called the Forgotten Blitz because in London, and the thought was for the UK that you've got all of these areas that are being hit, but they don't want that out in the media because stiff upper lip, we've got to keep calm and carry on. We've got to win this war. And so what happens when you have a found family of booksellers who are in the heart of Coventry and they're hit by this Blitz experience, and how do they survive? How do they come together? How do books and stories really bring people together? That's the heart of the book. And that's what I hope people walk away with, this heart for books can bring us together.
Well, I mean, you're speaking my language. Every time somebody asks, "What are your books really about?" I'm always like, "The power of story." It's kind of my catchphrase. So, we're writing from the same heart. And I love that what you do, which is my favorite thing about historical fiction, which is find one fact that you might
Mhm.
pull out and kind of flip on its head to give us a story. And one of those is the Coventry bombing. But is there any way that you can look back and tell us what you think was the very first seed of this story? Like the first thing that made you say, I think there's a story hidden in here.
It was the bookshops.
It was, okay.
It was absolutely the bookshops. Yeah, because I thought in the midst of this, you know what happened in the Blitz in London, but then I thought in the outside areas, were they doing the same things? Did they have communities in the underground, in the shelters? And then you start to dig in, you start to read, and you're like, absolutely. They had community newsletters or community
Really?
bulletins.
Oh,
Yes,
crazy.
that they wrote and published for their neighborhoods. And yes, it would include a lot of the news of the day, right? Like the internet of the day that would say, this is where bombs fell, this is where some of the damage is. But it also would uplift each other. They used this as an opportunity
Wow.
to have a sense of community. There were tea queues, there were tea lines, there were book
Yeah.
drives in the midst of every night, like these nightly bombings. People would wake up in the morning and they would either go to work, go to the weekly shop, walk their children to school, step around the bricks on the sidewalk, and they would keep going. And so that for me was
Amazing.
the bookshops and the books and the stories, and how stories from the front lines, we get stories on the front line in the Great War and World War II, because it's a split time novel, from the front
Yeah.
lines all the way to the home front, how
Yeah.
story real and the books really brought people together. So yeah, it was
It
all
is
about the
the
bookshops.
red thread that just binds us all the way through. But I want you to tell us a little bit more about what is the Forgotten Blitz and
Mhm.
why did you use that? I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, the Forgotten Blitz. Well, I've read so many books. I've written about the Blitz in London several times in
Mhm.
some of my novels. My novels are typically 20th century historicals, mostly World War
Okay.
II, but not all World War II. So I've read a lot of books about that. But then to come across something that literally has the words forgotten, I mean, that for an
I know,
author
I
of
almost
historical
would have wanted to use that as the
fiction, right?
title, right? The Forgotten Blitz. You're like, who forgot it? Why was it forgotten? What is
Yes.
it doing in
What
there?
kind
Yeah.
of blitz? Yeah. And so those areas, so many people didn't know, and I didn't know the extent of this, but there were so many areas that were hit across the United Kingdom. In Scotland, you've
Yeah.
got Aberdeen, you've got Peterborough, and Peterborough endured the second most number of bombing raids throughout the war,
Didn't
but
know
but no
that.
one knows this. And then in Coventry, as you know, the Coventry Blitz of November
Yeah.
1940, it was an 11-hour blitz through the night, some 500
Wow.
planes from Germany. You had over 600 casualties, over 1,000 who were injured. You had this factory city that before the war was automotive parts and ice boxes and gumshoes, what we call
Yeah.
wellies today, but more
Yeah.
gumshoes for really the whole country. And then they
Wow.
switch when the war starts to manufacturing plane parts, and specifically planes for the famed Spitfires. And so
Okay.
1/3 of the factories were completely destroyed. The other 2/3 were heavily damaged, over 37,000 homes damaged. This was the impact of this
Wow.
blitz. And it was forgotten again because they didn't want to have that devastation. It was graphic devastation in the media. And even to the point where there was a term in warfare that was coined out of that episode. It was called Moonlight Sonata, which was
Oh,
what the
wow.
Germans called it. But after that, the devastation was so severe, they coined the term Coventrarian, which means to raise a city to the ground, because there was essentially nothing left. That's how devastating the Blitz was.
I mean, it's so crazy how many things of that time we
Mhm.
think we know, that we've
Yeah.
heard it enough that and then we realize that I always say for each story we have, if you line up the people, there's a million more stories. And I love that you focused
Absolutely.
on the booksellers. Okay, now we're gonna dig into the land girls because I think it's so fascinating.
Oh,
So
yes.
tell us where that came from and how you found out about it.
Yeah, well, that's tied in with rural United Kingdom. So areas of the English countryside, the Scottish countryside, and you would have
Okay.
young ladies who they maybe London shop girls, right? And they wanted to help in the war effort. And this was from the Great War all the way through to World War II. It was picked up again. So by
Okay.
1944, you had over 80,000 women in the United Kingdom who left their lives wherever their home was, and they would go to these rural areas because through the blockades, through the war, they didn't want the United Kingdom to starve. And so they would go to the farms, no farming experience, right? But they would go and they would do different types of jobs, such as milk rounding, dairy production. They would dig ditches. They did gardening. And I always laugh about this one because it is the least popular role, but it's the one that I just really think these women were amazing. They were on vermin squads, which are which are official rat catcher roles. Can you imagine what that would be like to tell the grandkiddies, what did you do in World War II? I caught rats. I mean,
I was on vermin patrol. And by the way, you are vermin. Yeah, that is amazing. I think that knowing what people did and pulling out these booksellers, pulling out, the Land Girls, pulling out a Forgotten Blitz. Tell me how, in your research, you take these scattered pieces, Land Girls, World War I, World War II, Forgotten Blitz, booksellers, rival booksellers, how, which I'm asking about your writing process, which is how do you take all these fascinating seeds, is what I call them, throw them into this garden and grow this beautiful tree? Do you outline? Do you see what happens? How do you choose which characters to follow? Because each of these is so interesting on their own, but you have braided them all together.
I love this question, Patti, because I think every time you speak to an author, we're going to talk to other writers and we're going to say, your process is your process. And that's okay. That's okay.
Right.
So my process is, it's going to sound a little scary, but it works for me. It's taking all of those facts. And there's another one that's actually in the book. It's one of my favorite pieces of history. It's a little pocket of history. It is the Christmas truce of 1914, where you had on the front lines, on the Western Front.
I do know about that.
Yes, there's a pivotal scene in the book. So that's just another example of a fact. Well, for me, it's called the literary sandwich. I love it. I always know the opening scene in a book, bread, and I always know the ending scene in a book.
Oh, wow.
Bread. I just have no idea what's going to happen in the middle. And I always write character-driven stories. So while you have something that is going on at essentially another character, such as a war, you have to get beyond that and focus on the characters. And so for me, I write a non-linear narrative. That means I always write that first scene first. I typically write the last scene or the epilogue in the book next. And then I might write chapters 2, 3, 4. Then I might write chapter 22. Then I might write chapter 12. And for me, it's more about that character. What is their arc going to look like? And I have a brilliant editor. Her name is Becky, and she manages to clean up in aisle 6. You know Becky. She manages to clean up in aisle 6 and pull all of that together. So there is some organization. But for me, the thing that I love most is I actually don't plot. I take those real facts in history, and that's essentially like if you had a skyscraper, you had a structure of the building, those are the bones, those facts and those dates. And then everything else is just sitting down and just listening to the characters and what would it have looked like, sounded like, smelled like, tasted like, what would it feel like to be back in what would it feel like to be in a building that was just hit by a bomb? Or what would it feel like to be walking through those aisles of those bookstores in the 1940s? What would it feel like to be in an underground shelter, yet have hope and have courage and have a community that comes together over story? What would it have felt like to be a shop girl in London and go to northern Scotland on a farm in some of the
and be a vermin catcher?
Yes, and be a ditch digger. Like, what would that have been like? Some of the most amazing experiences. And so for me, it's all about the characters and telling their stories and giving that sensory perception. What would it have been like to step into this story, and more importantly, to step into history, and what lessons can we learn today?
I do love talking about process. And in the beginning, and I think this is true for a lot of writers, and we have so many writers who are listening, who are emerging writers, you hear somebody's process and you think, I'm going to do that. But we can only do it the way we do it. Right. And part of learning to be a writer is finding out what your process is. And I'm sure you know this, but it is said that Margaret Mitchell knew the last line of Gone with the Wind, and that was it. and wrote towards it. And I don't
That's
write towards an
amazing.
ending. So,
Yeah,
yes.
I do. I do. Actually, I love, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it. I love spoilers. Please don't put them on Goodreads, but I
Yeah.
love spoilers. I remember the last Harry Potter book standing in a Target store, and I read that last chapter and I said, okay, I'm satisfied. And I went and bought the book, and then I read it for the
No, you
next
did
3 days.
not.
Yes. Every
Oh my
movie, every
gosh.
TV show, please give me the spoilers because I'm so focused on those characters, the minutia of their decisions and their actions and what are they doing
Yeah.
and what if they would have done this, that if I know where it's going, right? If I have that
Yeah.
bread at the end, then for me, I can focus on the character's journey all the way through. And for me, it's a much richer experience. I recently read a book though where I didn't have the spoilers, and it was a new experience for me. It was a beautiful book. It was a 5-star book. It was The Women by Kristen Hanna, and I didn't
Yes, yeah.
know the end, and I just took the ride. I just went right
You were
through,
just
and I
along for the ride.
was like,
What
this
a
is new for me.
personality test. I feel
Yeah.
like, I'm really into the Enneagram and other things, and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Ooh,
Yeah.
I wonder what the person who needs to know the ending, wonder what that is."
She's a 4-wing 3 right
There
here.
you
She's
go.
a
There you go.
4-wing 3.
Oh, Kristy, I love that so much. All right. Um, my daughter is a 4. So
Mm,
I want to talk a little bit before we run out of time about 2 things. First, you
yeah,
are also a literary agent. So
I
I want to
am.
talk about how being a literary agent affects your work and how
Mhm.
work affects you being a literary agent. How does your creative life wind its way into that? I'm so fascinated by that because they seem very left brain, right brain separate, but
Yeah.
maybe they're not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the 15 years that I spent were actually in corporate America. And so I learned curriculum design principles. I was in adult education. I was a jet setting trainer. So I would be on stage, teaching things. And that for me was very technical, right? It was technical writing. I learned how to write in that way. But at the time, I was trying to get published. And, I actually wrote my first novel on my iPhone because that was all the time that I had when I,
Wow.
when I was on maternity
Kristy, that's
leave. Yeah.
amazing. Okay.
Yeah, and I would write in long elevator rides up the skyscraper. I would write in airports, and all of that for me was the creative side of my heart. It was taking a
Okay.
story and being able to just expand upon that. That was creative for me. So to step into the agent role, there's 2 things I love about it. I love working with creatives. I love
Okay.
working with storytellers. But then the
I
second
love
thing
that.
is,
You'd
yes,
have to
especially,
be an agent. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you can't sort of care about story
No,
if you're an
no,
agent.
not at all, not at all. And then I think the second thing is it's an even bigger excuse to read really great stories. So you
Oh,
get
that's
to read. And
fantastic.
then when you find something that's in your query box or that's a referral, an author, and you're just so excited for them, their story, their writing's beautiful. And you think, I get to be the champion for this amazing writer. So for all of my authors, I've only signed them because they are amazing writers. And I felt like I could be the best champion for their work. And I want to stand in the wings of a stage and have that spotlight on them and champion their stories. And it's sharing a lot of what was shared with me over the last 12 years now that I've been in publishing since I left my corporate role. And it's just
Right.
been amazing the things that people have poured into me, the knowledge, the experience, the information, to then get to put that out there and share that with
Yeah,
someone
and
else
use
and
and
encourage
share it.
them. It's
Yeah, it's
so
amazing.
rewarding. I had no idea
I
that it would
bet you are
feel like
so good
this.
at it. I
I
bet you
sure
are
hope
so good
so.
at it. You're just so full of energy for books that I bet once you find a book to champion, you are all in. And speaking of a book to champion, right before we came online, you told me about your new book, and I
I
need
did.
you to tell everybody else because it sounds amazing, and tell us when it comes out.
Yeah, so tentatively titled The French Kitchen. It's about an American expat post-war Paris, and she finds herself in a cookery class where she meets an American chef by name of Julia Child. I had no
Who's that?
idea. Who's Julia Child? World famous French chef, though she was American. Most amazing person. As I'm digging into her backstory, I initially had no idea that she had a quote spy backstory and worked for the American American OSS, which became the CIA. So it's going to be a split time story about this American expat character, and she finds herself in this cookery class, and it's bringing back all these memories and really a tangled web of things that were covered up, what she did as a spy in northern France, working in a chateau kitchen where you have the names like Rommel and Himmler, and you had Hitler on the guest list. And so we're intertwining these post-war stories and mid-war story. And yeah, it comes out in August of 2025. So next summer, mark your calendars because I'm writing it now, finishing that up this summer.
You are amazing, Kristy Cambron. You are an agent. You are writing at least a book a year. You are out speaking. So tell everyone where to find you, your social media, if you're out and about talking about the British Bookseller, because you, my friend, do it all. So tell us where to find you.
Oh, you're very kind. Well, you can find me at KristyCambron.com. One of my favorite spaces to hang out is Bookstagram. So I love to talk books, stories, whether that's fiction, nonfiction, whatever's inspiring you right now. Bookstagram is the place. And if I can go ahead and just give a really quick plug, I'm not for sure when this podcast episode is going to go live, but on April 27th, everyone please get out and support your local indie bookshops, because it is Indie Bookshop Day. And so everyone go out and buy the British Booksellers and buy Patti's books and all the books from our friends here at Friends in Fiction. So yeah, you can find us there. You can find my books in any store where books are sold.
That's awesome, Kristy. I love following you on social media. So I hope everybody else goes to find you also. And yes, I mean, part of the reason we founded Friends in Fiction was to support our indie booksellers. So
absolutely.
Indie Bookseller Day is coming up April 27th. So you have been such an amazing guest, and I know we could talk so much more, but thank you so much for coming. Everybody out there, go run out right now and buy the British Bookseller. And don't forget to tune in every Wednesday night here on Facebook or YouTube for brand new longer form content. And you can find everything out about the Friends in Fiction universe, from the live show to the podcast, Kristy Cambron, the newsletter, events, information, everything on our website, friendsandfiction.com. Kristy, thank you so much for sharing about this book. I love how you found these little seeds, braided them together, whether it's World War I, World War II, Land Girls, Coventry. It is fascinating, and above all, our favorite booksellers. So thank you for coming, Kristy.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.